All right, this is Microeconomics, Chapter 9. We're looking at the application of producer and consumer surplus in terms of international trade. All right, so if we were just trading in our classroom, some of you all said the market was too small, and because you were only limited to your classmates. And so you can think of your classmates as your domestic buyers and sellers. Domestic means here at home. Again, when we were buying and selling the toy truck in here, and we got to the equilibrium price of about $10.25, that was determined by the domestic market, by the interaction of our classmates here in this room. And now, after Chapter 7 and 8, we're able to actually calculate total consumer surplus and total producer surplus in our market for a particular item. You already know how to figure out consumer and producer surplus and how to identify it on a graph. And so we're going to start with this again, but this is for a market without trading yet. Without trading yet. So like when I gave you your cup and you hadn't done anything. And as y'all know, consumer surplus is the area below demand above price. Producer surplus is the area below price and above supply. All right, so if, like we said, if none of us had traded, these would all be plus zeros on the board in terms of what we gained or lost. And we wouldn't have allowed for the gains of trade. Now, most countries see that there are gains to be had, and so when we allow for international trade, are there going to be some losses? We said yes already. Are there going to be gains? Absolutely, and y'all showed that too. But now we can look at a more extensive analysis and actually see in terms of producer and surplus who is going to be gaining and who is going to be losing. And then we'll also look at tariffs in this chapter too. All right, so a couple of definitions. We're going to say the world price. The world price is the price of a product that prevails in the world market. And the domestic price is what is the price that it's bought and sold for, like our $10.25 for a toy truck here. Now, your author's making an assumption. You also have to pretend that that domestic price is also equal to the opportunity cost of that good. So just remember, this is what you give up to get something else, right? So if $10.25 is the price of our domestic price here, we're pretending that that's the only thing that we're giving up. We're just making that assumption, $10.25. Okay, so the world price, think of other classrooms buying and selling a product, and whatever their equilibrium price is out there, outside our classroom doors, is the world price, the prevailing price from trading out there. I also need a couple more definitions. I need to get through a couple more definitions. What we're going to do is compare the domestic price, so what we're selling it for in here versus out there, the world price, and determine who has the comparative advantage. All right. If you've taken macroeconomics, you probably learned already. Whoever has the comparative advantage has the lowest opportunity cost of doing something, of producing a product. The lowest opportunity cost, that means they're giving up the least in terms of what else they could be doing, because they can't be doing two things at the same time. They can't be in two places at the same time in terms of what we're talking about here with the opportunity cost. And in this chapter, you should assume, remember 2 slides back, that the domestic price equals the opportunity cost. So whoever has the lowest price has the lowest opportunity cost in this chapter. You should just think of it that way. Let me just give you a quick example. This is way back from chapter 3. If you haven't had macro, this is just a quick refresher. Chapter 3 is talking about Tom Brady and a college student. And the question is, should Tom Brady mow his own lawn? So we're going to look at the time that it takes to mow his own lawn. We'll just pretend for Tom Brady it's 1 hour. And for a college student, it is 2 hours. Except, you might look at this data and say, well, Tom should do it. He's faster at it. It takes the least amount of time. It's more efficient for him to mow the lawn. But your author says we're not thinking of opportunity costs. We're just looking at inputs here. In 1 hour, Tom Brady could have been making a Stetson commercial for Stetson Cologne and doing a photo shoot for them and making, a bunch of money. College student could have been working $10 an hour and getting $20, right? So here, it looks like when you look at this data, Tom should do it because he's faster at it. When you're looking at this data, who's giving up the least? The college student. And your author says, economists say, when we open up our borders for international trade, or you as a person, you're deciding, should I do my own, mow my own lawn? This is what you should be looking at. Whoever has the lowest opportunity cost, and we call that comparative advantage. Okay, so let's come back over here. If we can make the product here and here, let's just say $10.25, that was our equilibrium price before, for less than what everybody else out there is buying and selling it for. Let's pretend the world price, we'll just keep it easy. Our domestic price is $10. It's less than the world price, it's $11. So if our domestic producers can make and sell the product for $10, while everybody else is selling it for more expensive, then we should export the good. That makes sense, right? If we can do it cheaper, we should sell it to them. And we have the comparative advantage. So all that stuff that I just said about Tom Brady, we're assuming that your domestic price is equal to the opportunity cost. And if that's lower, then that's the definition of comparative advantage. And now, if we're buying and selling a product in here for $10, and everybody out in the other countries, other classrooms can make the same product for $9, then it would make sense to, again, open our borders, and because that means our international or our foreign countries can produce that product for less than we can, for whatever reason. So in this case, they would have the comparative advantage, or in this case, the world has the comparative advantage, and we should buy it from them or import that product. Everybody's in good shape with this slide? Okay. So let's take a look at that first situation. All right, so if our domestic equilibrium price before we open our borders and trade it with other countries is below the world price, so we can make it cheaper for $10 versus everybody else's $11. We're making some more assumptions now. Once we open our doors or open our borders and trade with other students from other classrooms, your author says that our sellers in here, our domestic sellers, is going to raise the price. Yes, we were selling it for $10 in here, but if everybody else is selling it for $11, once we open our borders, our sellers are going to sell it for $11 also. We're assuming that there's plenty of demand out there for this product, but the reasoning is, why would our domestic sellers keep selling it for $10 when everybody else has been paying and is expecting to pay $11 for it? So when we open our borders, the domestic price is going to rise to the world price. Our domestic suppliers are going to take advantage of that international demand. And now, what happens? We know that when price is higher than equilibrium, quantity supplied is going to be greater than quantity demanded. Usually, what do we call that?
Surplus.
A surplus. But now we're going to turn that surplus, it would have been a domestic surplus, into international exports. All right, so price before trade, $10. We've opened up our borders. Everyone else is buying that same product for $11. So our sellers here in this classroom are going to say, well, if there's a demand for it, we'll sell it for $11. So here's the price now after trade at the red line. As you'll know, when the price is too high, here's quantity demanded, here's quantity supplied. Now, remember, this is domestic supply and domestic demand. So how many items are going to be sold from domestic buyers? Right here. Because our domestic buyers here in this classroom, they were used to paying $10. Now we've raised the price to $11 and fewer of them are willing and able to pay. So this is how much product our domestic sellers are able to sell to domestic buyers. But look how much more they can sell in terms of foreign sales. And they're turning that surplus into exports. So what's the total amount sold now? Right here.
If they left it at the same price, would they be able to sell more and benefit overall though?
Well, the assumption is that we're going to match the price and that there is enough demand for it. I guess it would just depend. But, okay, let's see. Y'all know how to do this already. Here was consumer surplus before. Here was producer surplus before. Now, consumer surplus is what?
Only the A.
Only the A. It's the area below demand and above price, because this is our new price now. So after trade, here's consumer surplus. After trade, what's producer surplus?
Still C. Or C and D.
B, C, and D. It's the area above supply and below price. So now producer surplus has grown from this to this. From just the C section to B, C, and D. Okay, this pink D part, we didn't even have before, right? Before we traded. Now we trade, and when we say that there are gains to trade, if the gains are bigger than the losses, well, who lost out in this case? Consumers. Domestic consumers had this much consumer surplus, and they gave up that whole B section to producers because of the higher price. And so that's all they get now, but now producers get what they had before and some consumer surplus and some extra stuff that we wouldn't have had if we didn't open our borders. So when we say that the gains outweigh the losses when we open our borders, I mean, that's, graphically what we're talking about. So just to sum up, we saw that consumer surplus shrunk. It's just that A section. Producer surplus grew. Domestic producers were able to grab some of the domestic consumer surplus and that pink section. And we've got higher total surplus when we open our borders. And this slide, again, just summarizes what we have been talking about. Okay, so that's when we can make something cheaper than the rest of the world. When the domestic price is lower than the world price, to start off with.
What is gains of the winners?
In this case, the winners would be domestic producers, exceeding the losses of the losers. So let's come back over here. So what they're saying is that this is going to be bigger than the loss here. I'm not going to make you all calculate that on the test and figure out the area. You can prove that and actually calculate it and use the math and do 1/2 base times height and things like that. But for me, that's all you need to know. Okay, so now we're going to switch over. If the domestic equilibrium price before trade is above the world price, so for whatever reason we're selling a product more expensive than the rest of the world is selling it for, then it makes sense to open our borders and buy from them, right? to buy that cheaper product from another country or another classroom. And now, in this case, if everyone else is selling that same product for cheaper, then we can import that product. Okay, usually when the price is below equilibrium price, what problem do we have? A shortage. So what we're doing now is, let's say that we can sell our product for $10, but the rest of the world can sell it for $9. So we open up our borders, we bring in that same product that's produced and sold for cheaper. So the price is going to drop. We're going to match the world price now. So what's going to happen to our domestic producers? Well, this is how much they were selling before, right at D, the quantity associated with D. At this lower price, they're willing and able to produce less than they were at a higher price. Right? So this is the amount of domestic products sold. But what about our consumers? As a consumer, you're happy about lower prices, right? And so the quantity demanded increases from here to here. And that difference that would have been a shortage, people being angry and there's a waiting list and we're running out. Now we have fulfilled that shortage with foreign products in the form of imports. So now, again, original consumer surplus was A, original producer surplus was B and C. Okay, what's happened to producer surplus? Decreased to only C. Only C. It's the area above supply but below price. We're using this red price line now. Consumer surplus has grown from A to what? A, B, and D. Yeah. So, in theory, look at how much gain there can be when we import cheaper products. So again, we've got a higher total surplus. We've got that pink D portion now. When we import, consumers are better off, but our domestic producers are worse off. And again, this is just summing up what we were just talking about. Domestic producers worse off, and domestic consumers are better off. Okay, everybody's in good shape? Yeah, back one? Sure.
So when you're talking about, they're always talking about how we are a net loss of trade as far as we import more than we export. So what you're saying is our policy is in favor of the consumer. You say that as a broad statement, that we favor the consumer over the producer.
Well, if you just looked at it from that perspective, it would seem like we're for the consumer. We want a greater variety with with more competition and more choices. Should I buy it from here or should I buy it from an international firm? And there's more competition there. That'll result in lower prices for the consumers. You can kind of think of it that way. But, when we open our borders, it's domestic producers they're going to have to find a way to be more efficient, right? And for those of us, or for those of them who cannot find a way to reduce their production costs to compete, then they're going to have to leave the market.
I understand that, but okay. But the problem is for example, we take the externalities into the calculation here because we believe in a better environment. Whereas when you're competing with China, for example, who doesn't really put that much effort into pollution control, so they offset their costs are basically dumped on their population, and we never absorb those costs. So in order to compete, we would find then that we'd have to basically dump our externalities onto our population. in order to be more efficient.
Yeah, excellent point. And we're going to look at that more in more detail in Chapter 10. But yeah, I should say most economists are very much for international trade, but there have to be rules in place. When you have child labor laws, people getting exploited and having to be forced to work for terrible wages, when you've got terrible pollution, ruining your country. Yeah, I should have said that too. Economists are very much for international trade, but there have to be rules in place to protect that kind of stuff. Good point. All right, so now we're going to add something on. We're still talking about imports. We're still talking about a cheaper product elsewhere and bringing it in here. Oh, we've done that one. Let me come to this one. But now we're going to talk about a tariff. Okay, a tariff is a tax. We've talked about taxes before, and we know what happens to tariffs. They shrink the market. But now we're going to look at tariffs as applied to this chapter, international trade. So a tax on an import. That's why we haven't talked about it with our export part. All right, so it is on imports, and if we're going to have free trade, the domestic price is actually going to meet the world price, and it goes actually below our domestic equilibrium that we had before. But now that tariff is going to raise that price, right? And so now it's going to be a little bit higher than it was before when we just had regular free trade. Okay, so here we go. Figure 4. Let's see. Before trade, that's our equilibrium price. After trade, when we are importing a product and importing a cheaper product from elsewhere, the price meets the world price, and so we're looking at this price. Now, the blue line. Now, when we add a tariff, that raises the price. It's a tax, so it's going to raise the price up to that red line. All right. Now, at this red line, what's happened? What's the quantity? Actually, let me before we go there. At the world price, just regular, we've traded, we've opened our borders, and we were importing this many products. This is how many, or this is the quantity of products that suppliers are going to sell, domestic suppliers are going to provide. This is the quantity that our domestic, customers are going to buy. Okay, what happens with this tariff? Well, you go straight across, see where it hits supply. Did this tariff make our domestic producers better or worse off? Were they able to sell more or less?
Sounds like a higher price.
Okay, they sold a little bit more. Suppliers, law of supply, okay. There's a direct relationship between price and the quantity sold. And what about our domestic consumers? Okay, a little bit worse off because they were buying this much before, now they're buying this much. So you can see that taxes and tariffs, just like any other tax, alters the incentive structure, and we actually have a deadweight loss now of E. Our deadweight loss that from our quiz before was a triangle, but now, since this tariff shifted this price just straight up like that, we've got a deadweight loss right here. I'm sorry, of D and F. I'm sorry. The deadweight loss is just D and F, and E is the size. Is the size of the tariff, and this is how many we're going to import, and so that's the tax revenue that's going to go to the government. Okay, let's take a look at some practice problems.